I run a cafe in Vienna, and last spring this American couple sat down for breakfast. The woman mentioned she'd been here 2 weeks already, planning to stay another 2. Her husband said something about finally using their vacation days. I asked how long they'd saved up for a month off. The wife laughed and said, "We get 5 weeks every year. This is just part of it." Before I could respond, another American at the next table cut in. "That's impossible. Nobody gets 5 weeks paid. Are you independently wealthy or something?" The first woman looked confused and said her company gives everyone 25 days plus holidays. The second American stood up, visibly annoyed. "Ma'am, I've worked in corporate America for 15 years. The maximum anywhere is 2 weeks, maybe 3 if you're senior management. You're either lying or you work for some kind of nonprofit." Turns out the first couple had moved to Austria 3 years ago. The woman worked as an accountant for a regular firm. She tried explaining that 25 days is the legal minimum here, but her company actually gives 28. The other American called it communist propaganda and left to find another cafe. His wife stayed behind, apologizing, saying he'd been dealing with a lot of stress from work. She'd taken exactly 4 days off in the past year. My brother works at a hotel in Kuwait City, and an American family checked in for what they said was a once-in-a-lifetime 2-week vacation. The father kept talking about how he'd been planning this for 3 years, saving up days, making sure everything at work was covered. My brother mentioned that our staff all get 30 days off per year minimum. The American guy actually laughed, then asked if my brother meant 30 days total over a career. When my brother clarified it was annual, the man said, "So you work maybe 3 months a year?" He'd somehow done math where 30 days equals 3 months. His wife tried correcting him, but he insisted he was right. He spent the rest of check-in explaining how Kuwait's economy must be propped up by oil. Money handouts because nobody could run a business, giving everyone a quarter of the year off. My brother said actually we work 250 days a year, same as most places. The American looked at his wife and said, "See?" They admitted it. 250 days is barely half a year. This explains their GDP. I worked the welcome desk at a resort in Bahrain, and this American businessman arrived looking exhausted. He said he'd been saving vacation days for 4 years to afford this 1 week. I asked why he didn't just take the time every year, said his company only gives 10 days, and he'd been banking them for something special. I mentioned that in Bahrain, everyone gets 30 days paid leave after a year of service. He smiled politely and said, "I think you mean 30 hours?" When I clarified days, he said there must be a translation error. Not I probably meant 30 hours off per year, which actually sounded generous. He pulled out his phone to prove that no developed country gives more than 2 weeks. When he couldn't find anything supporting his claim, suggested that Bahrain's labor website must be aspirational rather than actual law. His wife asked if they could take a longer trip next time now that they knew. He said absolutely not, because these foreign labor laws don't apply to reality. I teach at a university in France, and we had an American exchange professor join for a semester. October, she asked when people typically take their 2 weeks off. I explained that staff get 30 days annually, and most people split it between summer and winter breaks. She said she must have misunderstood my accent, thinking I'd said 30 days over 3 years. When I showed her the labor law, she studied it for 10 minutes, then said, "This has to be for government workers only. Private sector can't possibly offer this." I told her I work for a public university and my wife works in marketing at a private firm. We both get the same. She responded, "Right? But what's the catch? Do you lose pay during those 30 days? I said no. It's paid time off. She sat down, genuinely distressed. This is going to sound ignorant, but I don't understand how French businesses stay competitive. In America, we work efficiently because there's no time to waste. Later told other American exchange students that France has government-subsidized vacation vouchers that somehow make the 30 days free for employers. She'd invented an entire economic system to make it make sense. My sister manages an office in Austria, and they hired an American consultant for a 3-month project. First week, he asked why the office was half empty in August. Quote, my sister explained that most people take 3 to 4 weeks off in summer. He said, wait, simultaneously. Who does the work? She said. We plan for it, bring in temps, and clients expect slower responses. He looked like she'd just described a post-apocalyptic scenario. In the States, we'd call that a business failure. You can't just shut down for a month. My sister clarified the office doesn't shut down, just runs on reduced staff. He spent his next meeting writing a report about Austria's cultural acceptance of low productivity standards. His evidence was that people take vacations longer than a long weekend. He genuinely believed that European companies survive despite their vacation policies, not because of them, and that American businesses succeed because nobody takes time off. When his own company offered him 25 days to stay on permanently, he declined, saying he couldn't be part of a system that doesn't value commitment. By commitment, he meant never taking more than 5 consecutive days off. I work at a Brazilian law firm, and we hired an American associate who seemed excited about the cultural experience. On her first day, HR explained she gets 30 calendar days off per year. She thanked them and asked when she'd reached that level of seniority. HR clarified it starts immediately, for all employees, by law, she said. I'm sorry. I think there's been a translation issue. You're saying after 10 years here, I'd get 30 days. The HR director pulled up the labor code showing it's the minimum from day one. This woman, a lawyer, read the law 3 times and then said, but this would apply to low-level workers too. When they confirmed it applies to everyone, she said, how do you prevent people from abusing this? The HR director asked what abuse she meant. She said, taking all 30 days. She genuinely thought the law existed as an upper limit that nobody actually uses, like a speed limit. When someone mentioned most people take their full 30 days, she said Brazilian culture must prioritize leisure over achievement. She worked there 8 months, took 4 days total, and wrote a LinkedIn post about bringing American work ethic to South America. I manage a pharmacy in Denmark, and we hired an American pharmacist through an international program. During training, I mentioned she'd have 25 paid vacation days plus public holidays. She asked if there was a vesting schedule, like maybe 5 days per year until she reaches 25. I explained it's 25 from day one. She got very serious and asked, what's the catch? Do I have to work holidays to earn these days? I said no, holidays are separate. She then asked, do I have to use them all in the first year or lose them? I explained she must take them by law, and unused days roll to the next year. She looked genuinely concerned and said, this sounds like a trap. What aren't you telling me? I asked what she meant. She said, in America, if something sounds too good to be true, it's because someone's getting exploited somewhere in the chain. Are the drugs cheaper here because pharmacists work for free during vacation? Her entire understanding of economics required someone to be getting exploited. When I explained Denmark just prioritizes work-life balance, she said, but who pays for it? Said employers, through operating costs. She never quite accepted it and spent her whole contract expecting to discover the real explanation. I own a restaurant in Cambodia, and an American couple came in asking about local attractions. The husband mentioned they were there for 3 weeks. I said that's wonderful. Most tourists stay 1. He said they'd originally planned a week, but discovered Cambodia gives workers 42 paid days off, so they figured 3 weeks was probably normal here. His wife corrected him, saying, the 42 days is for Cambodian workers, not tourists. He said, I know, but I figured if locals get that much time, 3 weeks wouldn't seem excessive. I asked if he gets similar time off in America. Said no. He gets 2 weeks, but he'd told his boss he was attending a work conference so he could take 3. I had to lie because my company doesn't believe in vacations longer than 10 days. They think you lose focus. I mentioned most countries see long vacations as beneficial for focus, he said. That's because most countries don't have to compete globally like America does. We win because we work harder. I didn't point out that Cambodia's manufacturing sector is actually very competitive. Spent 3 weeks here and returned to tell his boss he'd learned efficiency techniques from a conference in Asia. My father runs a food stall in a Kuwait market, and an American tourist started chatting with him while ordering. She asked what days the market closes. My father said we're open every day except some holidays. She asked how staff manage that with Kuwait's vacation policy. My father explained that everyone rotates time off. We have 30 days plus 13 public holidays. She said, wait, you work at a market stall and get 30 days off? When he confirmed it, she said, "Are you the owner?" He said no, he works for the market cooperative. She looked around at the other stalls, doing some mental math, and said, "If everyone here gets 30 days off, this market must be closed 30 days a year total." He explained people take different weeks so the market stays open. She said, "But that means someone's always on vacation. How do you maintain quality if there's constant turnover?" He said there's no turnover. People just rotate their leave. She kept insisting this system must lead to inconsistent product quality because nobody's around long enough to master their craft. She was looking at my father, who's worked the same stall for 20 years. I wait tables at a beachfront cafe in Syria, and an American family settled in for lunch. The mother asked if I enjoyed working in tourism. I said yes, especially because I get 24 paid vacation days plus 13 holidays. She laughed and said, "Must be nice to dream. I'm a paralegal and I get 8 days a year." I showed her my employment contract on my phone. She read it, then said, "This is in Arabic. How do I know this is real?" I pointed out the English summary at the bottom. She studied it, then said, "Okay, but this is probably for management only, right? Like you personally don't get this." I explained, "I'm a waiter, and this is the legal minimum for all workers." Her husband leaned over and said, "Honey, Syria's not exactly known for following laws." The mother nodded and said, "Right, so this is like a theoretical number that doesn't actually happen." I told them I literally just took 2 weeks off last month. Her teenage daughter said, "Mom, maybe it's real?" The mother said, "Sweetie, nothing's free. Somewhere, someone's paying for this." I thought about mentioning that it's my employer paying through my wages, but they'd already decided I was describing a fantasy. I work at a cafe in San Marino, and an American tourist asked for breakfast recommendations. We got talking, and she mentioned she's a teacher on summer break. I said that must be nice, having summers off. She said it's unpaid, though. They just don't pay us June through August. I mentioned I get 6 weeks paid vacation working at a cafe. She said, 6 weeks total over your career? I clarified, per year. She stared at me, then said, "No, you don't." Just flat contradiction. I showed her my contract. She read it 3 times, then said, "This says 46 days off total. That includes weekends, right?" I explained that's 25 paid vacation days, plus 21 public holidays, weekends separate. She did the math on her phone, then said, "So you work like half the year?" I explained I work 5 days a week, 47 weeks a year, which is about 235 days. She said, "That's way less than Americans work." "We do at least 300 days, I said. "There's only 365 days total." She got defensive. "I know that. I mean work days." One mentioned there are only 260 weekdays. She went quiet, then said American calendars must be different. I drive a taxi in Peru, and an American couple asked about getting to Machu Picchu. During the drive, the husband asked what I do with my free time. I mentioned I'd just returned from a 3-week trip to Chile. He asked if I'd been saving up for years. I said no. I took it out of my annual 30 days. He said, "Wait, taxi drivers get 30 vacation days in Peru." When I confirmed it, he said, "That's more than my wife gets, and she's a civil engineer." She nodded and said she gets 3 weeks after 10 years at her company. The husband said, "This doesn't make economic sense. How can a developing country afford to give taxi drivers a month off?" I mentioned Peru's not exactly struggling economically. He said, "But you're still developing, right? That means you should be working more to catch up, not taking vacations." His logic was that poorer countries need to work harder to become rich. So generous vacation policies would only keep countries poor. I suggested maybe work-life balance helps productivity. He said, "If that were true, Peru would be richer than America." His entire economic theory was that vacation days correlate inversely with GDP. I worked the ticket counter for trains in Mexico, and an American businessman was booking a trip to Guadalajara. He mentioned he was squeezing this into a long weekend because he only had 4 vacation days left. I said that seems tight for the whole year. He said he gets 12 total, but had already used most on his daughter's wedding. I mentioned Mexican workers get 12 days in their first year. but it increases by 2 days every 5 years, up to 32 days. He stopped writing and said, "Hold on. You're saying a Mexican train station employee can eventually get more vacation than an American executive?" When I nodded, he said, "That's why Mexico's economy is how it is." I asked what he meant. He said, "People taking a month off every year. There's no urgency, no drive." I pointed out Mexico's manufacturing sector is very competitive. He said, "Sure, but imagine how much more productive they'd be with American-style vacation policies." He genuinely believed Mexico succeeds despite its labor laws, and that adopting American policies would make it more successful. When I mentioned productivity per hour is higher in many European and Latin American countries, he said, "Those statistics must not account for vacation time properly." I'm a tour guide in New Zealand, and I had an American couple on a week-long hiking tour. On day 3, the wife mentioned this was their first vacation over 4 days in 15 years. I asked why they waited so long. She said American companies only give 2 weeks and they'd been using them for long weekends. I mentioned New Zealand workers get 4 weeks minimum, which usually means 20 days. The husband said, "For weeks sounds like a month." I said yes. 20 working days is for weeks. He got confused and said, "But months have 30 days. So for weeks would be 30 days off." His wife tried explaining that work weeks don't include weekends, so 4 weeks equals 20 work days. He said, "That doesn't make sense. 4 times 7 is 28, so 4 weeks should be 28 days off." I realized he'd never thought about vacation in terms of work days versus calendar days because he'd never had enough to make it matter. He spent the rest of the tour trying to figure out if New Zealanders were cheating the system by counting weekends separately. When I explained literally every country counts it this way, he said American companies must use different math. I work at a hotel in Finland, and an American guest asked about the Northern Lights tours. He mentioned he only had 6 days here, so he needed to pack everything in. I said 6 days is short for Finland. He said it's all he could manage, combining his 5 vacation days with a weekend. I mentioned Finnish workers get 30 days paid leave after a year. He said, "Yeah, I read about that. It's like a social experiment, right?" I asked what he meant. He said, "Giving everyone a month off to see if the economy collapses." "Kind of brave," I explained. "It's not an experiment. It's been law since 1960. He looked genuinely surprised and said, "So it's proven not to work, but they keep doing it?" I said Finland has one of the most stable economies in the world. He said, "Right, but it's also a small country. You can't scale these policies to somewhere like America." I mentioned the population isn't really relevant to vacation laws. He disagreed, saying if America gave everyone 30 days off, we'd lose our competitive advantage. Finland can do it because they're not competing on the world stage. I didn't mention that Finnish companies compete globally quite successfully. He left convinced Finland's economy survives in spite of their vacation policies. I work at a bookstore in Portugal, and an American woman spent an hour browsing. At checkout, she asked if I enjoyed my job. I said yes, especially with 6 weeks paid vacation. She smiled sadly and said, "That must be nice to imagine." I showed her my employment contract. She read it carefully, then said, "I believe you have this paper. I'm just not convinced it's real in practice." I told her I'd literally taken 3 weeks off last month. She said, "Okay, but did you get paid for those 3 weeks?" When I said yes, she asked full salary or like partial. I explained full salary is the law. She stared at the contract again, then up at me and said, "I've been lied to my entire life." She wasn't angry at me. She was genuinely processing that everything she'd been told about work and vacation was specific to America. She said, "I'm 47 years old. I've taken maybe 40 days total vacation in my entire career. And you're telling me that's not normal?" I nodded. She bought a travel guide to Portugal and said she'd be back for a longer stay, even if she had to quit her job to do it. She walked out looking like someone who'd just learned the sky's been a different color in the rest of the world.